Wow.
That was cool.
Back again after the long holiday break. So Hannah, how are you doing?
Oh my gosh, so much applause. I'm great. This is the first Raiders of 2025 because even more applause for that. Keep it coming, everybody. Brilliant. Welcome back.
There we go.
Gosh. And I suddenly felt like I was just hosting the Oscars or something there and just having to fill. But yeah, you have been out in the field obviously being Egypt. I was quite jealous that you got to spend 2 weeks out there rolling around the sand and temple running and all that. And I can't wait. I've deliberately not asked you really anything about it, and I've been saving all the good juicy questions for the Raiders because I want to hear everything about it. So please take it away, Luke.
Yeah, so this is my second time in Egypt in the last 3 months or something crazy like that.
Part of the job
and
now.
Yeah, just very surreal. So this trip was kind of expanding on my first trip. The first time I went was with Tolden Stone, who is an expert on ancient Rome, and that was kind of a teaser for leading my own tour, the Secrets of the Sands tour that I led with NEXT. And so all in all, I was there maybe almost 3 weeks. I arrived a little bit early with one of my friends, Nick, and he and I went out to Dashur. We saw the red and the bent pyramid, and then we went to Tanis and the city of Bubastis, which I may have a photo in here. But we did a little pre-tour excursion out to Tanis, and that was amazing. And then, so the tour started, and it was, for the most part, it was a recap of a lot of things I'd seen from the first tour. But I'm sure, as you know, actually, like, the more you go back to an ancient site, the better of an understanding you get, the better of a picture you get of everything that's going on. Because the first time you're there, it's like deer in the headlights. You're
like overwhelmed and don't know where to look.
Yeah, you're overwhelmed. You just don't really understand what you're looking at. But the most significant thing that I got to see this tour was, let me see if I can pull this up right here. And hopefully my camera doesn't freeze up like it typically does.
I'm awaiting the epic slideshow. Come on, guys.
So
whoa.
I got to go to the Serapeum and my camera froze.
Okay, but I can still see the visual.
Yeah, but I'll just keep going. So yeah, I got to go to the Serapeum, and really, I mean, this is like one of the most impressive, strange, mysterious places that I have seen in all of Egypt.
It's unreal. It's unreal. Just this catacombs of these weird boxes that look like they're in something out of like the year 3049 in the future. It's so bizarre.
Yeah, and even as conservative as like my approach to ancient history is, I still find these things absolutely perplexing. I mean, if you even approach it from, the academic point of view, and you try to follow the evidence for these being Apis bull burials, it's just odd that at every point that the archaeologists go in and they blow their way into these boxes, they never actually find anything inside any of them.
They've never found a cow in a single box,
as is so common throughout Egypt.
Sorry, my dog did not agree with that. Come here.
He feels.
You don't like that? He doesn't. Yeah, he feels very strongly.
He feels very strongly about that.
Yeah, no, you do not like it at all, do you? All right.
So, but yeah, if you follow the Egyptology, you never find hard, concrete evidence of these things. It was the same thing with we talked about the pyramids so often, of course, throughout the tour, and even if you try to approach them from the point of view of being tombs, and you try to play like devil's advocate against anyone, in the alternate space, you can't really, at least, in the initial 6 or 7 4th dynasty pyramids, there's so much happening there that is so odd, and so many things that don't add up. But getting back to the Serapeum boxes, yeah, just absolutely incredible craftsmanship. I mean, the polish on them. I try to convey it in this photo here on the right. It's like a mirror, especially in person. It's just so vivid. I noticed it.
So shiny. It's the experts in polishing granite down, or the surfaces. It's unreal how shiny and beautiful these boxes are.
Yeah, and really just the size of them. I mean, it goes beyond when you go in the Grand Egyptian Museum or the museum in Cairo.
Mm-hmm.
Even the sarcophagi that, I mean, okay, this is a red quartzite sarcophagus for the pharaoh Hatshepsut or Tutmos IV. None of them are built with the level of craftsmanship and
No.
expertise and precision that these are made with.
Also,
There's something so far beyond.
there's some weird question, like in my brain. I kept going, well, why the function of using this particular heavy stone? Granite is so much harder than a sandstone or a limestone. You could make just as big a box if it's all about size being the impressive factor. You could make just as big a box out of limestone and sandstone and do half the work. You wouldn't have to polish it down. Why polish it? Why the angles? Why this material? Also, like, you could get limestone locally to Saqqara, but this stuff came all the way from Aswan, hundreds of miles away, not local stone. There's so many weird questions, like, why did they pick that material? Because it doesn't seem like it has a point as for a cow box.
Yeah, it really doesn't. We tried to we talked so much on the tour about, like, what is the most reasonable explanation that you could possibly come up with if these are going to be Apis bull burials. And, like, the the most we could come up with, which is honestly an argument that we sort of thought about for the pyramids, is what if these are never actually intended for the body? What if it's just, I mean, do they go to these lengths just for a symbolic spiritual burial? Is it the burial place for the spirit of the god? Is that enough of a purpose for Egyptians to go to these lengths to bring these boxes all the way up from the Fayum and polish them to this level? I just don't know. It is so perplexing, and I've heard other people's theories about them. Like, I saw somebody say that they were growing crystals in them or whatever. I don't know. I really, to be honest with you, I feel like the Serapeum boxes and so much of the Fourth Dynasty, no matter what way you cut it, we have a incredibly incomplete understanding of what the hell is going on with these artifacts. If you try to take it, the hyper alternative realm, there will be places where the explanations just aren't complete. If you try to speak with an academic about it and you get into the nitty gritty details about the logistics of, the traditional Egyptological narrative, eventually that will fall apart too. And I think that was probably the biggest thing I came away with on this tour, was that some of these, well, definitely the Serapeum, and then so much of the Fourth Dynasty, nobody has a firm grasp on what exactly is going on at these ancient sites.
And there is only one. I think there's like 10 boxes, or I can't remember exactly how many, but there's a lot of these boxes, but only one of them has any kind of inscription and writing on it. All the others are completely plain, like beautifully aesthetically just absolutely plain, and only one of them has very, very hurried inscriptions on, which, if the story is that they were like, it was that these were made very, very, very late in the Egyptian dynasties, and that there was a rush project because, like, someone was coming in, I think, and it was all going to end, and so they were like very, very quickly making these shrines for these cows. But one thing that you know for certain is make the inscriptions for sure. Oh, and I think we've lost Luke, so I'm going to keep telling my part of the story until Luke comes back. But one thing that we know for sure is that you cannot rush making the boxes. So the box making project would have taken, you know, if you're using tools that we can think of in the historical record, hand tools and hand smoothing and hand polishing, they would take years. This is not something that you guys can bash together. And it also doesn't improve if you just add more people. I'm just continuing my story about the Serapeum boxes, saying that historically it was supposed to be a very rushed project at the end. It was at the very end of the dynasties, and they were very, very quickly trying to get the shrines to the cows in before I think the Greeks were attacking, and somebody was coming in and attacking, and it was all going to fall, and they were very quickly making these shrine boxes. But you can't make these boxes quickly, was the point what I was saying. Whoever made the boxes, and they have lots, and all the walls of the Serapeum were covered in writing and like historical texts explaining about the shrines and the purpose of the room, what it was being purposed for. But nowhere, and I remember asking NXT, I was like, is there anything about who made the boxes? Does anybody claim to have made the boxes? And he's like, no. Nowhere in the writing is there a story about how they were cut, shaped, moved, put in place. I think you can work out how they were put in place. I think it was to do, because you can see that there are holes in the ceiling on each side where I think they put wooden beams, and then it would have been like a winch situation. Even though they weren't supposed to have a wheel, but they just must have had like a winch situation, because you can't get the manpower down there. You can only fit like 8 to 10 people.
Can you hear me okay? Am I all right?
You can. You're a little bit. The visuals is flicking in and out, but
I know it's
fine. The ghosts of the Serapeum are like,
yeah. It's the ghost of the Apis bull messing with my computer. Sorry guys, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but yes, as far as I know, the cultural context of the Serapeum, I guess if you were trying to find anywhere in Egypt where they are Egyptians, which are for the most part later dynasties after the third intermediate period, whether it's like the Saite period or the Persians or the Greeks, which are commonly attributed to be the craftsmen or the dynasties responsible for the Serapeum boxes. As far as I know, nowhere in that cultural context are you going to have anything that is explicitly them claiming these boxes, which is interesting. I don't know what I think of them. I sometimes with Egypt, I don't know if I question the timeline or if I question technology. It seems like it jumps around so much. Like I feel like the place that I'm at right now, I don't know about the Serapeum in particular, but with the fourth dynasty, at the very least, if the fourth dynasty takes place when some of the evidence suggests that it does, we have such an incomplete understanding of what is actually happening during the fourth dynasty. Why is there such a turn? I'm writing a video about this right now. You know, I'll hear people talking about, if you say, well, the fourth dynasty pyramids don't have hieroglyphs in them. You know, you go to Seneferu's 3 pyramids, Maidum, Bent, and the Red Pyramid, and you bring up this question about, well, why don't we have hieroglyphs inside of these? And then a common rebuttal that I've seen even amongst like Egyptologists is, well, if you want to see burial places of pharaohs that are decorated with reliefs, you can go look at the Valley of the Kings, or you can go look at these other examples of tombs. And basically they're insinuating that this just wasn't a funerary practice as far back as the fourth dynasty, and it's only later. What were you about to say?
But I've seen recently they found some early dynastic tombs that were decorated. So I was like,
yeah.
So they did decorate it. So because obviously the answer to that is to go, oh no, they didn't decorate the tombs until much later. And I'm like, no, they did. So they did, and then they paused, and then they did, or that really wasn't a tomb, and that this was a tomb, and tomb has always consistently been a decorated thing. It's very odd.
Exactly. According to my understanding and some of the diving I'm doing about it, is that tombs were always decorated.
I think
They
so.
Even if not completely, like I went down into the tomb of Tutmos IV at the Valley of Kings, and it's not until you get into the burial chamber that it's like adorned from all the way around the burial chamber. But there are third dynasty, so say Djoser's step pyramid, those labyrinths underneath it are decorated, they think, to look like what Djoser's apartment would have looked like in Memphis, Egypt. I'm going to take this off first for just a moment. Hopefully this will get the tech issues to stop. But if you go down underneath the step pyramid, it's fully decorated. You have these doorways to nowhere that essentially show Djoser striding forward in the Hebsed festival, and you have the hieroglyphs going around the doorway, and then you have these turquoise decorations essentially embedded into the walls that they think looked like the interior of a palace that would have existed in Memphis. But not just him, there are these other third and second dynasty mastabas that I've looked into, where the photos that you can see, they have these they had stucco on the inside of the wall, kind of like how we have drywall. And that stucco was painted, and this is going back to the third dynasty. So if the fourth dynasty really took place or if the monuments of the fourth dynasty were really built according to the traditional narrative, then there's this huge shift away from all of the norms. And also, one of the things I found out was that the bent pyramid, you go inside the bent pyramid, it's completely naked along the entire inside. And countering one of the arguments that I've heard said that this may not be, these practice of having reliefs may not be something that actually took place in the fourth dynasty or took place before later periods. A few months ago, I went down to the Valley Temple of the Bent Pyramid, and it was completely naked. There was nothing there, and I was like, man, this is really odd. Well, there's a new part of the Grand Egyptian Museum that opened up, and they have reliefs cut off from the blocks and put on display in the Grand Egyptian Museum, and it's reliefs that come from the Valley Temple. So you have, and there was a ton of them, and I'm like, so you have all of this erected at the Valley Temple of the Bent Pyramid, and nothing inside the Bent Pyramid. It's
nothing inside.
Completely bizarre.
Yeah, it's. I mean, this just to loop back to the Serapeum boxes. I think that the Saqqara boxes, if I'm organizing it in my mind about aesthetic design from the different periods, it totally fit rather than 500 BC, like literally like the end of. To me, it doesn't seem like the artistry and the aesthetic of the very, very, very end of the Egyptian dynasties. Who was working in polished granite? Everybody, thousands of years before at the beginning. I have a feeling that they were repurposed for the cow, religion at the end. And yeah, interesting.
Yeah, these large megalithic. One of the things I noticed was that these large megalithic blank stones is such a fourth dynasty. It's such a fourth dynasty achievement, and it's weird.
It's such a fourth dynasty thing, bro. It's just
so
fourth dynasty.
It's just the fourth dynasty for the most part.
No, it is. It's they have their own aesthetic, and I love it. That's my favorite period. That pre-dynasty, whatever of that stuff is from the pre-dynastics right up to the 1, 2, 3, 4 favorite time.
Yeah, it really is. Something else that I noticed. Have you ever been? There's a chamber that's in the center of Karnak that is said to have been built by Alexander the Great's brother, and it's completely. I just now thought of this. I'll have to put it in a slideshow at some other point, but huge granite stones that line the floor and line the wall and the ceiling. And
the big granite block in the middle.
I
I
don't
think
know,
that. Oh
like
no,
what
no.
they call the offering tables or whatever that's in
Yeah,
the
but
center?
it's not a sarcophagus because it looks like it has a lid, but it's been half blown off. But it's there's nothing inside. It's a fake box with a fake it's not hollow inside like a
Maybe
sarcophagus is.
maybe this is
Maybe
it?
not.
But
I
I was
yeah
shocked. I had no idea that this was inside, in the center of Karnak, and
yeah.
it reminded me so much of the King's Chamber. Yeah, the blocks are it's red as one granite, and it's the
Mhm.
same size. It's attributed to Alexander's brother, but I just wonder, is it possible that this is, because Karnak, as we've talked about before on the show, is built on top of older Middle Kingdom, Old Kingdom temples,
Older
and
side, yeah, and they could.
I just wonder if that central area is connected at all to the Old Kingdom or
Yeah,
to the
I have
Fourth
that.
Dynasty.
I think that a lot of the things in Karnak that are granite, because there's definitely a lot layers of Karnak that are like sandstone and limestone, but there's a lot of stuff there like the granite, that granite sort of temple in the center, and sometimes there are these like parts of the wall are granite and then the rest of it's limestone, but they've
Mhm.
etched the same. They've then someone came and said, okay, well, let's decorate all the wall as one, and you can see that the guys have had a really tough time trying to draw like a face in the granite, and then it's really easy once they get into the smooth limestone and the
Yep.
smooth sandstone. And I was like, I have a feeling that block of granite was there before, and you've repurposed it into the wall, and then you've tried to just draw over the whole thing and make it look like one continuous thing. But I don't think you designed for that block to be originally of granite. I think there was probably granite structures there from way
Yeah.
before, and they've repurposed it every time a new dynasty comes in and they take it over and they want to put their artistic flair on Karnak, and then they switch it up. But
Yeah,
I'd
now
love to see Karnak pre-dynastic, see what was
oh,
there.
man, there's so much there. Walking around, that was the other sense that I got was, "Whoa, okay, most of what we're seeing now is New Kingdom that have razed these buildings to the ground and built something new." But there were other chapters of the same place that we're at right now. A good
Mm-hmm.
example for everyone listening is we talked about it on the show before, but there are places where the floor slabs in Karnak are missing, and underneath the floor slab is a base of a column from an even more ancient temple.
Oh
And
yes,
and
the
that
big
those old
big like
temples.
quartzy column bases that
Mhm.
you're like, this would have been huge.
Yeah,
Whatever
exactly.
was standing there before.
Exactly. And I think at Philae there was a Greek temple that we were at where and maybe you're familiar with this too. It's one of
Mm-hmm.
those it's Philae or it's Dendera, where you go there and there's another floor slab that's missing in the small chamber, and you can see column bases that are reused for the flooring.
Oh, Dendera.
It might be
Dendera.
Dendera, yeah.
They found that in Dendera. They were doing some like care work or restoration
Mhm,
work, and they moved the floor slab of a corner of Dendera, and they found they call it seeding. So you would seed a temple with
mhm,
a little piece from the temple or whatever important holy site was there before, and it like, which I think is a really cool thing. If you're going to build a new building, like always use a little corner of like what was there before
mm,
to continue it. It's a really cool tradition. But yeah, they seeded it with these columns, because at first when they opened the floor I was like, oh my gosh, what if that's a like what if the column is, but apparently they've just taken a slice of the column and seeded it in there. But where's the rest of the column? What was
right.
There was a structure with columns, because Dendera is really cool. I really like Dendera, but it's quite new in terms of the timeline.
Yeah.
Just really amazing. But I love the idea that it's built on something super old.
I think they all are. Speaking of which, I saw you left a comment here that said somebody said something about remodeling, reuse, recycle. I see those words going around here. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what's interesting is in the last 5 years or so, as the alternative space has grown, um, I forget the colloquial terms that are being used, but it's like the reuse, recycle. It's all these R words that have been
Mm-hmm.
popularized. And what's funny is that I've seen some academics kind of like roll their eyes at this in the last few years. But I saw a paper come out recently that said something about it was from an Australian Egyptologist. She put out something I think at the end of 2024, and the title of the paper was recycle, reuse, renovation, and there's another word. There was another R word that she used there, but it was like there's like R in ancient Egypt. And I was reading through it, and it was like this. It was a cool paper. It was this really detailed account of the Egyptians going back and constantly reusing things, and how Old Kingdom, Fourth Dynasty artifacts can end up, all the way down in the Greek periods. And I was like, I wonder where that little phrasing there came from, or how it got, popularized for her to use it. But anyways, so the alt space, while I don't agree with everything, it's making, I hope, positive waves that will inspire like enthusiasm in the academic world, that I feel like it's been missing for a long time,
Well, it's big puzzles. The whole of Egypt is it's puzzles around every corner. And it's puzzles that everyone, I think, should be invited to have a go at. Think about it. Look at it.
Reduced. That's the word.
Reduce.
It was like reuse, recycle, reduce, something like that. You guys could probably just look it up. All right, so let's get back to the presentation. Hopefully no tech issues.
So you got to see Saqqara. That's really cool.
Yes. Yep. And then here I'll just stop my camera while we're doing this. So this is me standing in front of some Greek Ptolemaic statues that were just recently erected at the Grand Egyptian Museum. This is pretty cool. I really love the Alexandrian era of ancient Egypt because they're, ancient Egypt purists don't really love the Ptolemaic era. But it's a fascinating time period because it is a family that is essentially given the duty to rule over a portion of Alexander's empire. And then when Alexander's empire breaks apart and the successors of his empire begin warring against each other, the Ptolemies have no place. They can't stay in Macedonia, in Greece. So they have to flee from Greece and come down to Alexandria, Egypt, and make it their home. So they have no choice but for Egypt to become a successful nation in the ancient world again. And they've been on the downwards decline for 700 or 800 years. And they were ruled over by the Persians for 2 or 3 centuries. And the Persians did very, very little to actually fund the temples, build new temples. They did really nothing. They basically just subjugated Egypt into being the Persian farmland that fed the Persian Empire. Now, the Ptolemies, let's say Ptolemy the First, who was Alexander's best friend, he's essentially in this position where he's not Alexander the Great. He's not this walking god conquering 32-year-old that just stunned all of the ancient world when he crushed the world's biggest known empire within a couple years. He's not that guy. And so he has to convince the Egyptian people that he is a worthy ruler. So what he does is he and his son and his grandson, over the course of their reigns, Ptolemy 1, 2, and 3, they have this huge job of showing the Egyptian people that they can return back to this lost great time period. You got to think in the back of all of the Egyptian psyche are the Great Pyramids that are sitting off in the deserts down at Giza, that harken back to this lost time period that I'm sure all of the Egyptians fantasize about and wish that they could go back to, right? Egypt has not been Egypt was never as great as the Pyramid Age. And, you have a period called the 18th dynasty, but even in some ways it's still on the downward fall from the Old Kingdom. Now, the Greeks, studying in the Library of Alexandria and the Museion, I feel like this is just my own study. I didn't read this anywhere. I feel like them commissioning this huge place that they call the Serapeum, which is it's an actual Serapeum in Alexandria, as well as Alexandria's library. It's this huge, massive, beautiful library. as well as the Museon, which is a center for higher learning that would have been next to the library, all these lecture halls, as well as the Lighthouse of Alexandria, which is within just a few feet of the same height of the Great Pyramid. What I think that they are trying to do here is to prove their greatness to the Egyptian people and win over the Egyptian people and say, look, we can return back to this age. We can bring Egypt back to this time of prosperity. And so I think that using Egyptian stonemasons and working in Egypt, and we know that the Greeks studying in the Library of Alexandria were obsessed with ancient Egypt. Many of them went and studied the pyramids. We have papyri where they're studying the measurements of the Great Pyramid and trying to figure it out, and they're measuring the height of it. I think that they re-engineered how to achieve a lot of these things, and that's why we see so many huge granite statues on a scale that hadn't existed in so long. We have this giant Diocletian's pillar right here. This thing is like 600 tons. You can see the people standing next to it, just how absolutely massive this thing is. One giant solid piece of gray granite that comes from the Fayum. And the Greeks were never doing this before they entered into Egypt. These kind of feats are only able to be conquered or only able to be done by Egyptians because they have the power and the resources that come from the Nile naturally. Like Egypt naturally gives civilizations the ability to achieve these things because it's so wealthy. So anyways, I think this is a really, really, really interesting time period. We should actually do a podcast just on Alexandria. I think that'd be fun.
I've never been to Alexandria, so you have the...
Oh, really?
Yeah, you have the head up on that.
Well, maybe one day when we do a Raiders tour, Alexandria will have to be a stop. We did that. We did that on the Secrets of the Sands tour, and I don't think that anybody on the tour knew exactly what to expect. But I think people were really surprised at how rich it was. There was this place called Comeldika that we went to, and it's essentially a slice of multiple pieces of the city of Alexandria. Like when you're standing up on the hill, you can look down, and throughout Egypt, you're mainly standing at the base of pyramids, you're at religious temples, and you're at graveyards. That's really it. But here, you're actually standing where people lived. This is where normal people spent their time. Normal people didn't go hang around by the pyramids. Normal people didn't go into the temples. Normal people didn't go hang out in the graveyards unless they were stealing stuff in the dead of night. This was a place where people lived. So Comeldika, it's a slice of Alexandria's library, which very few people know. You can go see part of the campus of Alexandria's library. You can see these lectures. There's two huge auditorium-style lecture halls with three other smaller interior lecture halls inside of the building. Right next to it is a gigantic red brick Roman bath that would have probably would have been built in the 1st century AD. And then next to it, there's a super rich neighborhood that Greek and Roman Egyptian people would have lived in. And then there's this place called the Villa of the Birds. Oh, I see somebody put that in the comments. There's a place called the Villa of the Birds, and you can see these mosaic tiles on the floor. And then next to it, there's a cistern. And so you have this huge, just cut out section of the ancient city. And I thought it was fascinating. It clicked for me while I was there, how monumental it was. And I think I think everybody on the tour enjoyed it as well. So at some point in the future, I'll have to take you there because it's a cool slice of history where you can see people, you can see Europeans who are obsessed with ancient Egypt and very interested in studying it, just like we are. You can look at ancient Egypt through their eyes and see what they accomplished while being inspired by this, essentially a lost civilization. Like the Old Kingdom, comparative to the Middle Kingdom, is a lost civilization in itself. By the time the Middle Kingdom comes around, it's a completely new civilization. By the time the New Kingdom comes around, that's a completely different civilization that's reading and writing and speaking in the hieroglyphs are completely evolved. I'm sure that the spoken word doesn't even sound the same anymore, right? the new kingdom is completely disconnected from the old kingdom. That is a lost civilization. Anyways,
And I wonder how much of the old kingdom was repaired and restored from another timeline of earlier Egyptians that is still stuck in that grey pre-dynastic time.
I think so.
I do think that there was a really good argument that the first dynasties of Egypt came together and had a big renaissance and a big restoration project. And they were looking at some of this stuff going, wow, like the ancients, what was going on here? And that's kind of why they didn't really document the making of, or like attribute very heavily to who made it. Like if I made a pyramid, everyone would know I made that pyramid.
Right.
It would be so clear. It would be stamped. There'd be books on it. There'd be a movie of a making of the movie. Like, do you know what I mean? If I'd achieved that and designed it, I would not be so humble as it to just be like, yeah.
It is an odd thing, right? It seems to break all of the norms that we see anywhere else in history, even in ancient Egypt. Like almost every feat that takes place during the New Kingdom, every temple that's built, every statue that's erected, the pharaoh is saying, I did this. Just so you know, I did this.
And it's not even like a show-off thing. It was just tradition to be like, my name, bro. My name.
Greek rulers did it. Roman rulers do it.
Everyone does it.
It just seems to, it's just fascinating that all of the most striking monuments in Egypt break all of the, even just the psychological norms that that great rulers must have had.
Humans and rulers, exactly. I was like, wow, what, to have the balls to just make something and just leave it. Be like, you know what? I'm not gonna leave any credit. We're gonna just make them think for thousands of years, and there's gonna be arguments, and there's gonna be wars, and people are gonna claim that they did it, and then they're gonna, like, actually, genius move, because we're still talking about it today on a podcast. But yeah.
Somebody said Ramses built this. That's so funny.
Yeah, Ramses built it.
When you go to Egypt, I used to find, this is my personal bias showing, this isn't very historian of me, but before I started traveling to Egypt, I always thought Ramses is really interesting, right? Like he's the most notorious pharaoh of Egypt. He's commonly attributed to be the pharaoh of the Exodus. But then once you go to Egypt, he's actually just annoying. He seems like he's a twat. He puts his name on absolutely everything, and
the Ramesseum.
He ruined his own legacy by doing that, because you have no idea what he's actually done.
He killed the vibe completely. I was like, dude, it's kind of, it's giving Kanye vibes now.
Also, saw lots of vases. I'm sure you've seen these. But just absolutely amazing. On the left, that's diorite. In the middle, that is gray granite. And on the right, I think that's diorite too. Or it's some kind of granodiorite. But it's just amazing that at the museum in Cairo, you have the dustiest, darkest little corner. I mean, the only reason that we have adequate light to take photos of these is because I have multiple people shining their phone lights on these vases.
Oh, so this was Cairo Museum. So you went to Cairo Museum and the Gem?
Yes.
Wow. I've not been to the Gem. It wasn't open when all the times I went to Egypt. But I quite like the Cairo Museum just because it looks like 100 years old. I feel like I'm stepping into the set of The Mummy.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And I could just, I'm in the 20s and I could just zip into the library and there we are. But,
I hope that they don't take the artifacts from here and move them to the Grand Museum. The Grand Museum is amazing. You'll be blown away at the presentation. Everything is so
nice and
bright.
shining.
Everything is so bright and vivid. But the Cairo Museum has a quality to it that, you're right, it feels like you're in The Mummy. It has heart. It has a lot of heart and soul in the museum, and it kind of feels like as you're walking around, you get to make little discoveries on your own, because these vases, which are some of the most remarkable achievements in all of ancient Egypt, like, I think it's there's so many hot takes about these, where people have said, sort of like the obelisks that are erected at Karnak, that crafting one of these vases might be harder than building a pyramid. To
Oh, mate.
actually
Unbelievable.
Achieve this, the method that it would take to carve these and so finely polish them and bore out the inside where the inner wall is parallel with the outer wall, and it's so thin that they become translucent. I mean,
Like, exactly.
how do
And
you
also,
do that?
whatever tool it is that's shaping and slicing and carving and shaping this stone, it has to be a tool that it can cut through the quartz, and then a millisecond later it has to transfer into like the rock part, and you keep complete form. So
Mm,
obviously the quartz is a lot there's like it's softer or harder depending on whether it's going through the like rocky part of the stone or the quartz part of the stone. And whatever the tool is, it has to be something that slices through both of them identically. Otherwise, you would have dips in the quartz where it's too soft and it would be coming out. So
mm,
engineers are looking at this going, this is insane. What tool did they use? What was the how did they do that? How did they slice through something that's like 3 on the Mohs scale and 9 on the Mohs scale with the same tool and keep the same momentum, the same shape, and you're not getting dips wherever there's quartz or dips wherever there's like a slightly variation in the stone. It's like an engineering mind-blowing puzzle. I love watching engineers look at the vases and be like, it's amazing. I love it.
Speaking of that, have you ever gone to a modern day stone vase shop in Egypt in any of your time in Egypt? Have you ever done that?
Well, we went to where they make the alabaster ones, and they
Yes.
were like the alabaster replicas of these ones. And you got to see how they were like traditionally made. And I asked the guys there, I showed them a picture of this and said, "How do you make this?" And they went, "We can't, no idea." And
Exactly.
I was like, interesting. Okay, thank you for your time.
Exactly. Well, we may be talking about the same place, but we went there, and maybe it was NEXT or it was somebody else that they were showing us how they make the little statues out of alabaster, and we pulled up the Hardstone vases and showed it to him, and we're like, "Can you make this?" And the guy goes, "Yeah, with a machine." And so it's amazing. I mean, the fact that this is done again during pre-dynastic, there's no debate about this. Nobody says that these could possibly be dynastic.
Oh
Just
yeah, no, they
shows
stopped. No, nobody knew how to make these in the Egyptian dynasties, I'm betting.
it just shows that undoubtedly there's a lot more going on in pre-dynastic Egypt than anybody firmly has any idea of.
Any idea?
Largely because, I mean, Egypt is probably the most ransacked and raided ancient country to ever exist. There's only so much real estate along the Nile that you can build on. So if you have something that's built, let's say 3500 BC, 400 years before the first dynasty begins, 400 years for a temple to sit there. Just imagine what happens in the course of 400 years in pre-dynastic time. And then think about how long 3,100 years is from the beginning of the first dynasty to Cleopatra's death. But then most people don't even realize this. You have another 670 years. Yeah, 670 years of ancient Egyptian history that continues. Most people don't realize this when Egypt is subjugated and annexed into the Roman Empire. So you have 3,900 years of ancient Egyptian history, roughly, that's documented. But then you have a period that we don't really know how far back it goes before that. So you can just imagine how much is lost. You'll find this very interesting. The certified Egyptologist guide that we were with, this guy he's more legit than even a regular Egyptian guide. There's something about him that NEXT said it, but there's something about him that far distinguishes him more so than a regular guide. I was talking to him at the Osirion, and I was asking him, I was like, all right, man, how old do you think that the Osirion is? Some people think it's Seti in the 19th dynasty, and that it's connected to Seti's temple. Some people think that it's 4th dynasty. Some people think it's 12,000 years old. And so I asked the guy, I was like, what do you think about this? And he goes, I think that this is before Dynasty 1. And I went, what? Really? And he said, yes, I think similar to the Mecca in Islam, I think that this is a pilgrimage site that people in the first, second, third, fourth, fifth dynasties revered. And that's why the pharaohs had themselves buried here. I think this is the most important place in all of Egypt. Now,
I would agree with him.
He did think that it was the burial place for Osiris, but he was like, that's just the most that's like the easiest explanation of what this is. He said it's more, but we can't understand it because it's lost to us. But he said, I think this is the most important place of all of Egypt. I think it's he said something about, or maybe I said, okay, so you think this is like central to Egyptian psyche, or at least the royal people of the dynasties? And he said yes. And then so actually that got my wheels turning. I started thinking, what if the fourth dynasty pharaohs like Senefru, Khufu, Khafra, Menkaura, what if the reason that it's not obvious that their bodies were actually literally buried in the pyramids is because they're buried down here at Abydos? You know, you see all their viziers, you see everybody in their government, all their family members. Their tombs are all at Giza, and they all have reliefs in them. They all have their names inscribed in the walls. It's obvious that that's a burial place, but it's not obvious with the pyramids. And what if, like many pharaohs later on, they have a symbolic burial in the north and a real burial in the south? And I've just always wondered, what if I just recently started wondering, what if legit, like, I'm being as conservative as possible as like, you know, a semi quasi academic person. What if seriously there was never a body buried in the pyramids? And I'm being like as conservative, not woo woo at all. I think there were no bodies buried in the early fourth dynasty pyramids.
Well, that would match what they found, which is no bodies buried in the early fourth dynasty pyramids. So you're not mad for saying that. Personally, I think you're more mad to insist that there was a body that was never found, because that's reverse. For me, that's reverse evidence. If you went to court to say there is not even a forensic level of a burial in any of the pyramids. Later bodies at later dates, because I think they were repurposed as tombs later on, but there is zero evidence of like early dynastic burials so I don't think you're insane. I don't think it should be weird to say that. I think it should be weird to insist that there was something there that there's no evidence for. You know what I mean? Luke, can you pop your camera back on? Because you are spitting bars, and I just realized like I can't see you, and I was like, I'm gonna cut that little bit for social media because that was amazing. And I was like, I can't even see you. I can't even see you. I can just see a vase. But I agree. So this tour guide was saying that personally he thinks that the Osirion is a pre-dynastic thing. Do you know what? The Abydos, that whole area, it is one of the oldest areas of any dynasty. That's where you start getting the first and second dynasty structures. So it completely makes sense with his timeline. Like, it was starting there. The evidence that we have of structures and tombs and things, and obviously you build stuff where previously was important. Abydos aligns. There's loads of like alignments in Abydos to other sites and other structures. I think it makes complete sense that they built this thing. There's nothing like it in the rest of Egypt. There is nothing that is 5 stories deep, plugged into the surface, engineered in a way that withstands earthquakes because it moves with the surface of the earth. It is plugged in. That it is incorporating, it's on top of a 900 meter running aquifer. There's so much architectural engineering problems, and how the hell did they do that? It's running to this day. The water is still running. I don't think it's a tomb though, because I don't think, for me, water is like life and ceremony. And I feel like the energy of the Osirion, you didn't get to go down there, but it doesn't feel like tombish. It feels very much like I don't know, you go in the water, and people go there and they go and they drink the water and they bathe in the water, and there's, you know, people who want to get pregnant go to the water, people who want to get healed, people who want to refresh themselves. There's a guy who once he found that the Osirion water, the guy who was helping excavate it since like the 80s, once he checked and said the water's like gross because it's a bit stagnant now because of the silt, but it's safe to drink. And he filtered it and he drank liters of the stuff, gallons of the stuff. And he said he didn't feel any different until he went to get his driver's license renewed and realized that his vision, he'd always needed glasses, was 20/20, and it's been fine since. And so he was like, the only thing that I think, bar something else, he was like, I drank liters and liters of this water. And he thinks he felt like he had like bodily restoration from it. But he can't prove it, but that was just his own personal little science experiment. And I kind of lean to agree with him. I don't feel like water and death is very much, we use it for baptism and for new life and for ceremony. And so, yeah.
All right. Another hot take on Egypt. When you were talking about water and healing.
Mm-hmm.
I was having a conversation while I was in Egypt, and I was saying, you know, something I never actually, you know, I don't put it in my videos because I don't really know how I feel about this.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes I just wonder. And I just had on this podcast I'm working on, I just had an expert who's a professor at Idaho University. He was coming on to talk to me about the occult and people who believe in this other world, you know, and I was talking to him about, like, we were talking about magic, and we were talking about, is it really possible for people to access another world? And is it really possible that this other world has sentient beings in it that people can, you know, tap into? And he said that's what occultism is. It is trying to control and manipulate the other, this nether realm that exists all around us. And I was having a lot of conversations when I was in Egypt, and I was thinking, you know, is the reason that modern day Christians don't see miracles like we used to is because we don't live in that kind of world anymore. We don't live in the kind of world where there actually is magic, where, you know, I'm getting way off the rails. This is insane for me to talk about.
It's all right.
Are we now completely separated from this other chapter of human history where people were much more connected to something beyond just our 3D reality? And I just wonder if the Egyptians, who are essentially, you know, the first known ancient civilization, like the first, you know, this civilization absolutely did exist. They come out of this primordial water of, even if you can take it back 12,000 years, there are Egyptians that arrive in the Dakhla Oasis that are building villages 12,500 years ago in ancient Egypt. I mean, the Egyptians form out of this primordial sea where we hardly know anything about human history. They just appear. And I just wonder if they are, maybe using an NEXT term here, they're like really connected to source. You know, they are aware of things and tapped into things that we're not aware of. And you saying something about water having healing properties, and it's kind of symbolic of, it's a place where people go to be healed, right? I actually feel like, I hadn't thought about this, but I actually feel like him saying that he felt like the Osirion was like the ancient Egyptian Mecca, and that people traveled there for some kind of importance, to be blessed or to have good things happen to them or good fortune come over them or to be healed from sickness. And then you said that about water. I just hadn't even processed that. Yeah, that makes so much more sense, that would be the purpose of the Osirion, is that it's a place where people go to be healed. You know, it's this central primordial place of ancient Egypt. I'm not sure.
I think that the way it's designed as well, because the way you enter from the south, there's like the moat, which is 15 meters deep of water all the way around. But to get to the central island, there are these steps that descend, and then there's steps that ascend. Again, it's all like kind of symbolic, but also physically, you would have to dip yourself down into the moat, be submerged, like almost like baptize yourself, and then come out the other side. And I think that we still in religions today, we have these echoes of these things like baptism and giving water this property of like cleansing your sin or restarting your life, or like people get reborn out of water. And I think it might like hark back to practices that maybe were more functional. Like if you could if it's all made out of granite for a reason, for quartz or whatever, and you could energize, and you literally plugged this temple deep down into the earth on a site that was pretty like energetically, when the aquifer, that water is unlike any water source in the area. They're doing studies right now on the water in the Osirion, and they've categorically said that it is not the Nile water. It is not from any well that is accessible in Abydos. It is this 900-meter aquifer spring, and it is like original source water, exclusive to the Osirion. And the ancients knew that. Like they knew this water wasn't just tapping into like a Nile source. So yeah,
that's amazing. And I'm not, you may not be able to answer this question, but would that mean would they have a way of consistently resupplying that well with, I mean, I get that it's fresh water, but if you have water that's sitting there stagnant, it could go bad. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting too far down the weeds there, but if it's constantly being resupplied with new water from the ground, that means the water is going to be cycling through.
Yeah, it's like it's an aquifer, so it's kind of like its own fountain. It's got, I think it's traveling up and traveling down. There's also some in the center island. There are also some like channels and holes. So I think there's waters are going away. And who's to say that there aren't at layers down this 5-story building that's underwater, that there aren't channels and aqueducts and there isn't a whole system of like irrigating. And today, I don't think that irrigation works because there's a layer of silt from thousands of years of it being covered with sand and covered with rock and covered with debris and there's like a silty mud layer now, which makes the water green, even though the water's still clean. It looks kind of icky because I think they've lost the filtration process. Doesn't work at the Osirion like anymore or as well as it did. But back in the day, I'm imagining this thing was clean. I'm imagining that it was all sort of sparkly and amazing. And it would have all been under it would have had a roof, so it would have all been like inside, which would have been amazing. You're going into like this womb of primordial waters. I don't think it was a place where you would, because tombs you don't visit. This place seems like it's a place that saw action and like a Mecca. Definitely.
The people went down in there. See, I saw this comment. How far back do we push the timeline, and to what end? Over the years,
Osirion or the overall?
I don't know.
Osirion, I think it's conservatively 4th dynasty. If it was before, I'm thinking my other end of where my thoughts lie on this is I think it's somewhere similar to wherever the Sphinx enclosure was carved out, because at the very back of the Osirion, there is like a Sphinx enclosure carved where they carved out all the way along to dig this thing right the way down. There's a back wall. It's quite far back and you're not looking at it because you're so busy looking at the megalithic blocks and the water and everything. But I took some pictures of it and I showed it to Robert Schock when I grabbed him for like a minute at Cosmic last year. And I said, hey, I don't know anything about rocks, you're a geologist. Do you think that the erosion pattern here, is that water erosion, and is it similar to the stuff at the back of in the Sphinx enclosure? Because to me, it looks to my eyes identical. And he was like, yes, I think you're onto something there. And I think he's touched on it in his own research, but was being kind enough to make me feel like I'd spotted it. But so that's my one piece of like evidence of why I think it could be on that kind of older, is because there is erosion, and like that same thing of like water erosion that's coming down from the Sphinx enclosure, it's in the Osirion enclosure as well. So that would be something to look at. But I don't think like anyone's gone and properly documented, measured, bothered looking at it. Why would you if you think it's from Seti the First?
Yeah. Okay, so answering it, the Osirion and maybe Egypt in general, I have like I guess I come from like a mixed bag background. Like I got started in all of this. You have all of Graham Hancock's books right there. Though all the books that I own, those are the first ones. Other than the ones my grandpa gave me. So, and then I went and got a degree in anthropology, so I have this mixed bag perspective that I come at things with. I think that maybe where I'm at right now, it's more so technology versus timeline. Although I think that there's a lot of sites that are attributed to younger dynasties that I think like, nah, that's a fourth dynasty architect doing that. Whoever built the Valley Temple, whoever built Khafra's mortuary temple are the same people that did the Osirion, my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but with that said, I think that the carbon dating actually shows that a lot of stuff on the Giza Plateau is also centuries older than they still currently claim that it is.
347 years when they did the carbon, they testing all of the sort of what they could carbon date from around all the pyramid sites, all the fourth dynasty stuff, and it all came out conclusively around 347 years earlier than, and a lot of it, there's a paper, I think I have it on my page somewhere, where they show the historical timeline of the building of the pyramids. This person's son, 20 years later, this person's son. They only had 20 years between the dynasties to build all these structures. So 20 years for this son. Anyway, and then when they did the carbon dating of the organic material that is like in and around these structures, they all shift about 347 years. So either we've got the timeline for the dynasties 347 years wrong, and it's all a lot older, and Egypt started a few hundred years before it did, or I think it could indicate that there was a big building project, restoration project, resurfacing and repurposing some of these things that potentially were there from maybe 1,000 years before. And that's why a lot of the carbon dating and the activities is coming out at around that date, because that was, and they were all coming out around the same time as well. It doesn't show this like linear thing of one, oh, that pyramid's 50 years older than this one. They all show to be coming around the same time, 340 years. So I found that really interesting. I'm like, why is no one like circling back to that and like working out why that is? Why should we do a triple check? I think there was 2 lots. There's 80s and 90s carbon dates. And I think they should triple check that. Not that everything should be based on carbon dating, but it's a really good question to go,
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard evidence that throws a wrench in what we think of the timeline. And if all these sites are actually even at the least 3 centuries older than we thought, what happens to the rest of Egyptology at that point? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Everything shift.
Yeah, I mean, like, okay, so everything shifts. At what point is there huge gaps, centuries of gaps in our knowledge of what's going on? I mean, the butterfly effect of that is immense. If they study more on that, of course, I'm not pyramid archaeology moves at more than a snail's pace, but there's huge questions there. So anyways, Osirion, I think, as of right now, I think it's older than the 19th dynasty. I think it's definitely contemporary with 4th dynasty monuments, and at the very least takes place during the 4th dynasty, whenever exactly that is. But then the Egyptologist that we were with telling me that he thinks it's up to 1st dynasty or before that. Then now I'm like, oh, and he said something to me like, he's like, I was like, really, you really think so? Because it looks like it's the same kind of architecture as, or very similar architecture to the Valley Temple and Khafra's temple and some of the sites up on the Giza Plateau. And he said, no. Why do you think that all of the pharaohs in the first dynasties were buried here? And I was like, oh. He's like, they want to be near this, and it just blew my mind at first. I was like, whoa, okay, I get where you're coming from now. This is like the central point. This is the most important. This site is the most important thing in all of Egypt.
It makes more sense that these people would start to choose to be buried like at the Mecca source, at the place where like it's all where you could be connected to the ancients who built something like this. Like, it makes so much sense because Abydos is so far down compared to anything in Giza, or it's you have to takes a few days travel, and yeah, for me that makes perfect sense. And like the oldest Egyptian stuff we have is in Abydos. I think it all started there, or restarted there maybe, but yeah.
Clicking on a few of these comments if you want to read this one.
Okay. I think it's believing. I think we may have lost our ability to truly believe in making a change. Something's power. Sorry, there's like no.
It's all right.
In making a change, some powerful things have been achieved with belief, healings, miracles, all sorts of things we don't believe. Well, this is kind of looping back to like the magic versus modern times, and have we lost magic? And I think that a massive chunk of magic we now see as science, and so it's lost the like awe, because we can understand a little bit about why some chemicals will react and make a poof, or why we can heal things with certain frequencies, because we understand more. We've taken like the woo out of a lot of things that are magic, because really there's so much stuff that is science is magic. But there are things that we still, real like basic things that we still don't understand in science, like things like plasma and the way that water reacts to the environment, that still have little bits of magic, I think, in there. I'm gonna find I can't remember off the top of my head what her channel is, but there's somebody I follow on Instagram, and it's a woman who does loads of experiments with water and freezing water, and she thinks that that water is the very element that is the kind of bridge gap between what you were saying about this source world, which is maybe like sentient, not physical but sentient, and the fact that maybe ancients could tap into it like way more, and they had the tools in which to do that, which was often like things like frequency, sound, vibration, a lot of drugs, but water. And every single ancient site in the world, pyramids, everything was connected to water source. And anyway, this woman does these really freaky experiments with water, where she shows water like images, and then she freezes it, and then in the crystals is not like exact imagery, but you can see it's almost like it's been like she'd show for example something like horses, and then it would freeze the water, and then there would be there's like an image memory in the crystals of what the water had seen. And she says it also, she does it with words, she does it with different languages. So it's not just something it's not a phenomenon that's happening just in English or just with like visual. It's really interesting. And I'm going to definitely I'll put it in the description, this woman's Instagram page, and I'll send you it, because I was like, crap, maybe there's a whole load of science about water that we don't even know about yet, but maybe the ancients did, and they knew that water had like a power source. You could charge it, that maybe it had some sort of connected to source. I
completely agree with you. I'm kind of in Egypt phase right now, but when I was in college and I was studying the Maya world, when I would go down to Latin America, I would sit there in the jungle and I would stare at these leaves, these really, really symmetrical 5-sided leaves that lay on the jungle floor. And I would just stare at it and stare at it and stare at it. And I would think, if the modern world did not exist, I didn't have my phone that my brain would dive into and take up 8.5 hours of my day every day, and TV shows that I could shut off my brain and vanish into this other place, sitting in here and pondering over the natural world that's at my fingertips, I would spend a significantly more amount of time doing that. And how many epiphanies about the ancient world and the way things interwork together would I eventually have? And what if it wasn't just me? What if it was the other, I don't know, several dozen million people living on the planet as well over the course of thousands of years, all doing that and all seeking out ways to extrapolate the most out of their natural world? Like, how much more would you realize? And vicariously, you're also more in touch with your with spiritual life, your soul and who you are and the way that you emotionally and spiritually interact with the world around you. How much more potent would that experience be, and what kind of things would jump out at you? I know that for myself, once or twice a year, when I go out to the deserts in West Texas, like on a night when it's a new moon, there's, the sky's completely black and the stars are out. And I have, a couple of choice like substances in my body. Every time I do it, I have this connection to this outer world, this greater world. I lose my sense of self. I lose my ego and my identity, where I'll like look at photos of myself and I'll go, who is that person? That's not me. I'm, connected to this, like I'm connected to the spine of Osiris right now. It's, I just think that if I spent my entire life doing that, my entire outlook of the world is completely and utterly different. And the things that I am able to perceive and the things that I understand is utterly different than a modern person living in the 21st century. But anyways, we got a soup here. Burns, I'll let you read this one.
I've been into the theory that the pyramids were used for chemical processes. It's intriguing. What are your thoughts on these? Love you guys. I'm also really interestingly following the idea of pyramids as original kind of like chemical plants. I think that even though there are some parts of the theory that I don't think are more feasible or hold too much weight, but I do think that there are some parts of it that do hold weight, and actually it's very true. I can see that the designs of a lot of the internal designs of these pyramids, in my mind, it does make much more sense that there was water, like the shafts that are going down. They do not make any sense for human beings to be entering. They are at a level, they are descending 100 feet, 90 meters. They're 3 foot by 3 foot. They're not designed for humans. They're definitely not designed for any kind of ceremonial procession with a dead body. Super disrespectful. It'd be like Weekend at Bernie's in the pyramid. There's no way. I can see that it's designed, however, for water. All of those shafts as well, they have like a kind of pit at the bottom. So it seems like it's designed more for like a liquid than a human body. So they're really good ideas. And also the fact that there is chemical analysis that shows that different pyramids have different chemicals. So it's not just like the same, because they're made out of all of the same things, like the same basic elements, the limestone, the granite. But they have different chemical compounds in different sites, which makes me think that they were used for different things. And I can see why, especially things like the step pyramid being potentially like a methane converter, and all around the step pyramid, that whole area, what happens over hundreds of years, you get a cow religion. And like original source, it's the cows that make the meat, like, because you would be taking like cow pat and whatever, making meat. And I was like, okay, I can see how dung and things like collecting dung and the dung beetle and the cow become like massive figures in Egyptian iconography, and I can see where that tracks if you're like taking an origin source. I'm like, interesting. So around the step pyramid, if it was originally for methane, and then you get the cow, and so I think that I don't think that you should just throw it out, the idea. I really think that it's land of chem, and I think he's kind of the only one who's really deep dive investigating it, especially like, again, you went inside the red pyramid.
I did.
One? It stinks in there.
Yeah, a bunch of our group, they, as soon as they got down in there, they didn't, I think some of them didn't even go to the back of the to the third chamber. They just left,
and it's not
because of the smell.
Initially I was like, oh, it's ammonia, like it smells a bit like piss. But then I bleached my hair and I went, no, that's ammonia. That smells like bleach. And I don't think it's human, although because there are parts of temples where unfortunately there are humans, or the guards pee everywhere. It's different to that. It's separate to that. I also don't think it's bats, because there are bats all over the bend.
All over Egypt, everywhere.
There are bats in every pyramid. There are other pyramids that are full of bats, and they don't smell at all. So why is the red pyramid like literally leaking, like it's chemically got ammonia seeping out of the walls? You can't account for that with a body, it being a tomb. You can't account for that, really. That something chemically was going on, whether that was chemicals that were applied in the process of making it, but I don't know. But I think it's really interesting. It makes way more sense, personally, that people would be making these structures for a functional purpose that would then give back to society if it's this massive project, rather than like it being for one guy to be like, my pyramid's bigger than your pyramid. For me, I think that they seem like science things. They're encoded with sacred geometry. They're not just symbolic. I think they were functional. There's whole parts of Bob Greenier has like a pyramid theory. There's a part of the Great Pyramid that's missing today. If you look up at the Grand Gallery, there is it's been chipped out of the side. He thinks that there was granite blocks that were fitted at the top of the Grand Gallery, and that when at the very end, when Greeks or whoever were coming, they had to take, or whoever it was that needed to like deactivate the pyramid, he thinks that they were taking out the core of it, and that they would have been like a radioactive or something infused granite quartz blocks, and if you take that out, then the rest of the pyramid sort of doesn't work. He also thinks, well, he said the theory that he sat on would only work if the Grand Gallery was mirrored, and then you had on the other side another Grand Gallery, and then because he goes, the only way that would work is, and then you'd have these like radioactive, or maybe that wasn't the right word, but they were sort of like charged stones, and you can see on the ceiling, you can see like a circular point of where like almost like a burn ring, where he thinks it's to do with like the science of it and like the waves that were going through the stone. Anyway, he was like, no, this theory only really works if there's like if there's a space that's the size of the Grand Gallery on the other side to mirror it. And then guess what they found on on the scan like last year? They found that there is another space the size of a jumbo jet, aka the Grand Gallery, and they don't know whether it's running parallel, because the Grand Gallery is like that on the wonk. They don't know whether it's, but there's every chance, because they can't accurately scan exactly the shape of it, that it's like that. And if it is, then I think Bob is onto something very, very special. And it is interesting that nothing else is like missing. Everything else in the Great Pyramid is completely intact, apart from somebody's obviously very quickly and very roughly hacked out these a part of it. And I was like, maybe we're missing the capacitor.
Yeah. On the Great Pyramid, we'll talk about it next time, but I went underneath the Great Pyramid as far back as you can possibly go into this.
Oh, you went down into the subterranean?
Yeah, went into the subterranean chamber, and you know the little grate that's covering up the western shaft that goes like 150 feet out underneath Giza. Yeah, so me and a couple of other guys like crawled all the way to the back of that and just laid back there and turned off all the lights and just laid there under the Giza plateau as far back as you can go under the pyramid. Next time I'll show some photos. As far as what I think of the chemical plant theory that's largely been coined and championed by Jeff Drum over at Land of Kim. I think that I've said before that I think it's my favorite alternate theory, in that it is a complement to the Egyptians. Most of the time with some of these other theories, you don't really know, okay, well, what exactly is that doing? Like, all right, it's generating electricity or something like that. Well, where does that electricity go? You would think that we might see it somewhere. That's a really tough theory to completely flesh out and make it, you can look at the pyramid isolated and you can theorize about, okay, here are these aspects about the pyramid and here's maybe how it works. But then, okay, project's finished. Let's look at the rest of the Egyptian world. why is this being built? And that's a hard thing to answer. But in Jeff's explanation, I feel like it's complementary to the Egyptian people, because it gives you, I should even say at the very least, like the most necessary thing in an alternate explanation is, what is the purpose of this? Like, what is the actual purpose of this alternate theory? And in his, he has a very well defined, well, here's what I think that it was doing. Here's the product I think it was producing for the Egyptian people. It is using the Nile River just as the Egyptians would have used it to help make Egypt more wealthy, to help elevate the Egyptian people above the rest of the Mediterranean and ancient world that they were surrounded by, right? His theory is a complement to the Egyptians, which is why I say it's my favorite theory. But
and
I'm
it's
not
also the chemicals that would be produced, like the methane and the sodium chloride and things. He was saying, like, the uses for it, there are multiple uses for it, especially if you were doing on a mass scale, like fertilization for crops. Especially if at the time the land was changing, and it was changing from green Sahara into desert, and it was actually, I can completely see a world where green Sahara is disappearing, and that people are putting their heads together and they're going, we're living in a desert and we need to grow stuff, and we need to and that being like a kind of, people are forced to be inventive in times of like high pressure and stuff. And I can see maybe in a world, maybe 6,000, 5,000 BC, and they're having the plane of their entire world is changing, and they're having to go they're relying more and more on the Nile. And yeah, like, I can see a world in which they were like, well, if we could construct these things that we could then make fertilizer, and we could make more crops, because we used to just be able to take it naturally from the green Sahara, and now we've got to really work for it, and we've got to adapt and survive. I think that makes sense in my mind.
Yep. Tammy K, hey, thank you so much. And man, you've got a couple of beautiful dogs there. What kind of
puppies?
What kind of dogs are those? I love those. They look like big Rhodesian Ridgebacks. That's the kind of dog that I want next.
My dog's given up and just fallen asleep. He's bored now.
Yep. Jose Taco, how are you doing, man? Hopefully that 360 camera was useful on the trip. Yeah, so Jose gave me a 360 cam that I used in a couple of very interesting places, that will come out in a video at some point. But Jose, I'll have to send you, I'm kind of just getting settled at home. I've been here a week as of today. But once I get the footage exported and put on my Dropbox, I will have to I'll have to share it with you. And thank you guys very much for the soups. Jose, thanks for for letting me use a 360 cam. I got to get that back to you. Johanna, what can people expect from you in the future?
Well, just getting back to the research. I'm going to enjoy this year getting back into it all. I'm not attending Cosmic this year. I'm pausing for 1 year because one of my best friends is getting married and I'm a bridesmaid, and her wedding landed right on Cosmic weekend. So I was like, so sorry, can't host Cosmic this year. I'm in talks about maybe pre-recording some stuff so that I can maybe be part of the fun.
That'd be cool.
But next 2026 I'll be back at Cosmic. And yeah, that's kind of what we're doing. Just plan. Let's get back to planning and researching.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we need to maybe put together some tour plans for 26 or something like that.
Yeah.
So me in the near future, lots of Egypt videos coming out.
Oh yeah, you're gonna have content for years.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. Man, there's a lot going on this year. Probably not February, but March, when I get back from this Mexico tour that I have in a couple weeks from today. My podcast, Dare to Be Wise, where I'm just talking to my friends. Johanna and I have a long overdue episode that is actually older than Raiders of the Past, is going to come out. I've been filming this podcast for a year and a half. I have 25 episodes. I feel like I'm just now sort of starting to find my flow. I recorded 2 podcasts last week. I have 3 or 4 lined up this week, just talking to various experts and lots of different things. I actually have Taylor Jones coming on, who is the world champion of AMMA, which is armored mixed martial arts. And so it's basically these people dressing up like medieval knights and beating the absolute crap out of each other in an octagon, full on production, like an an MMA fight. And so I'm bringing him on to talk to him about. I know he's an ancient, or I know he's a medieval history nerd. So I want to talk to him about how do you get in this headspace? What are you reading to get into this? So, anyways, that's coming along. That's going to be March, and then this summer is going to be tough. So May, my wife graduates from dental school, so she'll be a dentist, and then she accepted a job in North Carolina. So we've got to move in May, June, and then she and I are going to Peru for 2 weeks, and maybe an extended week because might have to do some research in June, unless we have to move. So I think that's going to prevent me from doing Cosmic this year too. I think I just have too much going on. And there's 2 weddings that we've got to be at. Yeah, there's 2 weddings that we got to be at. So you and I might have a leap year, and we both might be back at Cosmic
and back
in 26. Let me think what else. Lots of ancient Egypt videos coming along. Dare to be Wise podcast. My other project, which is kind of on the back burner that probably won't really start going until the fall, is I'm starting a modern history channel called American Steel, and it is covering the history of the Allies in World War II. And maybe just like 1 or 2 videos a month, maybe just 1 video a month. But I'm excited to get started on that. So anyways, that's our little, I guess, year recap, catch up, whatever, what to expect this year. So, well, Johanna, I thank you again so much for your time. It was
that's right. This is
great
really
to
fun.
meet up again.
We took an hour and a half on this. We were going to keep it nice and concise, but next time we can just do a whole other hour on like the rest of your tour, because there's still so many sites in Egypt we didn't even touch on.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, we should also say expect us to have guests this year. That's gonna be a big thing.
Yeah, because we had our first guest just before Christmas and it worked really well, and we loved having more people in the arena to chit chat with. So we'll be finding lots of fun guests and just hopefully, smooth sailing. For anyone out there who's like umming and ahhing about starting a podcast, just do it. You'll work it out along the way. It doesn't have to be perfect. We've had so many technical problems, and it's taken us like 10 episodes to find a rhythm, but we're here now, and we're going to be Mondays. We're going to pick a Monday a month. And
yeah, absolutely. All right, guys. Well, thank you all very much. Raiders, over and out. Bum, ba-da-bum, bum, ba-dum.